All right, so today we're going to dive into something super interesting. We're going to be talking about how different generations
Yeah.
see the world of politics. We've got this really cool article called Generational Perspectives and Their Impact on Today's Politics. A journey from baby boomers to Gen Z. Get ready because we're going to really unpack how some major events, like from the Vietnam War all the way to 9/11, even to the rise of social media,
hmm
how all that has shaped the political outlook of each generation.
It is pretty interesting. We often talk about like a singular political climate,
Yeah.
but it really is more like, like multiple climates happening all at once, all with their own patterns, weather patterns. And those patterns are heavily influenced by when each generation, came of age.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. It's like each generation has its own, political DNA. It's shaped by the world that they grew up in. And this article breaks it all down, starting with the baby boomers. This is a generation that witnessed the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, Watergate. I mean, talk about a crash course in government and social change.
Exactly. And these events weren't just headlines, they were lived experiences for these people. That's why I think you see such strong support for things like social safety nets, like Social Security and Medicare, among the baby boomers. They're trying to protect the progress that was made during, their really important years.
Or it makes you wonder if we had lived through those times, would our political views be different today? But let's move on to Gen X now. The generation sandwiched between the boomers and the millennials. So what was their defining political weather, so to speak?
Well, if the boomers were about big, huge social change, Gen X grew up with a much different vibe. They came of age, as technology was exploding. Globalization was totally reshaping the economy. And you had all these scandals like Iran-Contra that really made them question the institutions they were supposed to trust.
Okay, so that makes them more skeptical,
Mm.
more pragmatic, or
Yeah.
not necessarily buying into any grand narratives. I can totally see that. But wait, before we jump to the millennials, the article mentions that in Europe, Gen X actually leaned more towards national identity
Mm-hmm.
during the coming of age. That's pretty different from their North American counterparts.
It is, and it highlights a really key point.
Mhm.
Generational trends aren't monolithic. Geography also plays a huge role. Like what was happening in a particular region at the time, it colors a generation's worldview.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting. Okay, now I'm even more curious about the millennials. They get a lot of attention, but I'm ready to move past the stereotypes.
Yeah.
Give me the political DNA breakdown.
Okay, so for millennials, the world changed literally overnight. 9/11 happened, and that shaped their views on security and foreign policy in a way nothing else could. Then came the Great Recession, which threw their economic futures into total uncertainty. And all of this was happening as climate change was looming larger and larger.
So they're dealing with all these existential threats, basically right from the start. No wonder the article talks about them having this strong sense of urgency, this need for, systemic change.
Yeah.
But it's not just about feeling anxious, right? They're actually doing something about it.
Totally. Millennials are incredibly active, especially when it comes to social justice. Think about movements like Black Lives Matter or the push for LGBTQ plus rights. They're at the forefront demanding equality and using technology to amplify their voices.
Which brings us to another point. Millennials are digital natives. Social media isn't just a way for them to connect with friends. It's their town square, their news source, their organizing tool. It's how they engage with the world,
Yeah.
Including the political world.
Yeah, and that is a huge shift. Politicians can't just rely on traditional media anymore. They have to meet millennials where they are, online, speak their language. And it's not just about being on Twitter. It's about understanding the issues millennials care about, like climate change, social justice, mental health.
Okay, so we've got the boomers focused on those social safety nets, Gen X questioning institutions, and millennials demanding change online. Now, what about Gen Z? They're the ones who've never known a world without the internet. How does that shape their political DNA?
Well, Gen Z takes digital engagement to a whole new level. For them, social media isn't just a tool. It's an extension of themselves. It's how they express their identity, connect with their communities, and, yes, engage in politics.
So we're talking TikTok activism, Instagram campaigns, organizing on Discord servers. But how effective is all that? Does a like really translate to real-world change?
That's a great question, and it's something that we'll explore in more depth later. But the article highlights some really compelling examples of Gen Z using those digital tools to drive real-world action.
Like what? Give me a sneak peek.
Well, for instance, there's this one group that used TikTok to mobilize young voters in a local election. And it actually swung the results. They understood the platform, knew how to create content that resonated, and they used it to get people to the polls.
Okay, now that's what I'm talking about. It's not just slacktivism. It's about using technology to make a tangible impact.
Exactly. And it's forcing the political establishment to pay attention. Gen Z isn't waiting for permission to participate. They're creating their own spaces, their own rules, and they're making their voices heard.
This is so fascinating. We've got these four generations, each shaped by unique events, coming at politics from totally different angles. But what happens when those angles collide? That's what I really want to dig into next.
Welcome back to our deep dive into generational perspectives in politics. We were just talking about how Gen Z is really shaking things up with their, digital savviness and activism.
Yeah, I'm still thinking about that example of them swinging a local election using TikTok. It's pretty incredible to see how they're like rewriting the rules of political engagement. But
Yeah.
let's be real, not everyone is on board with these new tactics. This article talks about some pretty serious generational clashes happening in the political arena, right?
Oh, absolutely. And those clashes go way beyond, just how people are using social media. It's about fundamental differences in like values priorities
Yeah.
and how each generation sees the role of government.
Okay, so give me an example. What are some of the biggest points of friction?
Well, climate change is a prime example. The article points out that this is where the generational fault lines, become really obvious. You've got baby boomers who are understandably focused on economic stability. They might even question how urgent the climate crisis is, or at least the solutions that are being proposed.
Right, and then you have millennials and Gen Z who are like, hello, this is the planet we're inheriting. They're demanding immediate action, even radical changes to address climate change. No wonder things get heated.
It's not just a difference in opinion, it's a difference in lived experience.
Hmm.
Boomers grew up in a time of relative abundance, while millennials and Gen Z are facing a future that might be defined by climate disasters and resource scarcity.
That makes total sense. It's like they're speaking different languages, even though they're talking about the same issue. What about other hot-button issues? Does this generational divide play out in other areas?
Absolutely. Think about social justice, particularly racial inequality. You've got a generation that fought for civil rights, often through, traditional means of protest and legislation.
And then you've got millennials and Gen Z who are challenging systemic racism in new ways, calling out microaggressions, demanding accountability from institutions, and using social media to amplify the voices of marginalized communities. It's almost like they're picking up where the previous generation left off, but with a whole new toolkit.
It is interesting because the article argues that both generations ultimately want the same thing, a more just and equitable society. The methods might differ, the timelines might clash, but the underlying aspiration is often shared.
I guess that's where the opportunity lies, right? Finding that common ground, bridging the gap between different approaches.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that each generation brings, its own strength and experiences to the table. We need the wisdom and institutional knowledge of the boomers, the pragmatism and problem-solving skills of Gen X, the passion and activism of millennials, and the tech savviness and innovation of Gen Z.
We need all these ingredients to bake the cake of a better future, so to speak. But how do we actually get these generations to work together?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to politics.
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, there's no easy answer. But the article does offer some, interesting insights.
Yeah.
One key idea is promoting intergenerational dialogue and understanding. It sounds simple, but it's about creating spaces where people from different generations can actually listen to each other's stories, acknowledge the different, historical and social contexts that have shaped their views, and find those points of connection.
So it's less about debating who's right or wrong, and more about understanding where everyone is coming from. I like that. But how do we move beyond just talking and actually get to action? Especially when it comes to voting and elections, where things can get so polarized.
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. One of the most striking trends we're seeing is the growing divide in voter turnout between older and younger generations. Baby boomers, and to some extent Gen X, still largely rely on traditional modes of political participation, like voting in person on Election Day.
Whereas millennials and Gen Z are much more comfortable with early voting absentee ballots. Using online platforms to register and find information about candidates, they're all about convenience and accessibility.
Precisely. And this shift towards digital engagement has huge implications for how political campaigns are run. Candidates can't just focus on TV ads and rallies anymore. They need a strong online presence, a sophisticated social media strategy, and the ability to connect with younger voters on their terms.
It's like they need to speak the language of memes and viral videos to capture the attention of this audience.
In a way, yes, but it's not just about style. It's about authenticity and understanding the issues that resonate with younger voters. climate change, social justice, mental health, student debt. These are topics that are, top of mind for millennials and Gen Z, and they expect candidates to address them in a meaningful way.
So it's not enough to just show up on TikTok. You actually have to have something to say. But I'm curious, how are political parties responding to this generational shift? Are they adapting their messages and strategies to appeal to younger voters?
They are, but it's a mixed bag. Some parties are embracing progressive policies and a more digital-first approach to reach younger voters. Others are doubling down on traditional values and targeting older demographics.
It seems like this could further entrench the generational divide, right? If we're all just getting fed information that confirms our existing biases, how do we ever find common ground?
That's a real concern. And it highlights the importance of media literacy and critical thinking, especially in a digital landscape where information overload is like the norm. We need to be able to discern fact from fiction, to engage with diverse perspectives, and to think critically about the information we're consuming.
That's a whole other deep dive right there. But for now, let's focus on how we bridge the generational divide in the political arena. It seems like such a daunting challenge.
It is, but not insurmountable. And this is where the article gets really interesting. It talks about the importance of intergenerational representation in politics. We need more young people running for office, more diverse voices at the decision-making table, and more opportunities for cross-generational mentorship and collaboration.
So it's not just about changing how we vote or campaign. It's about changing who has a seat at the table in the first place. I like that. But how do we get there? How do we empower younger generations to take on leadership roles?
It's a multifaceted approach. We need to create pathways for young people to get involved in politics, whether it's through internships, mentorship programs, or even just providing them with the resources and support they need to run for office.
I'm thinking about all those amazing young activists we see online, leading movements, speaking out on issues they care about. Imagine if we could channel that energy and passion into formal political leadership.
Exactly. And it's not just about young people taking the reins. It's about creating a culture of intergenerational collaboration where older generations are willing to step aside and make space for new leadership to share their wisdom and experience and to support the next generation of changemakers.
It's about seeing each other not as competitors, but as collaborators, working together to build a better future. I'm starting to feel optimistic here, but I know this is a complex issue with no easy solutions.
You're right, there's no magic bullet. But I think what's most important is shifting the narrative from one of division to one of shared responsibility. We need to recognize that the challenges that we face today, climate change, economic inequality, social injustice, require solutions that transcend generational boundaries.
We're all in the same boat, facing the same storm. And we need all hands on deck to navigate it successfully. Before we get too carried away with metaphors, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how this generational dynamic plays out beyond the political realm. Because let's face it, these differences show up in our everyday lives too.
Yeah.
It's funny, we've been talking about generational divides in politics.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking about how all this plays out in my own life, Just the other day, I was talking to my younger cousin. She's just starting out in the workforce. And her whole approach to work-life balance is so different. Her expectations about flexibility and remote work, it's just so different from what I experienced when I was her age.
Yeah, it really is a whole new world. And it's not even just about perks or technology or whatever. It's about like a fundamental shift in values. This article talks about how millennials and Gen Z, they're prioritizing purpose-driven work. They want to feel like their jobs are making a difference in the world.
Which makes sense, given everything they've grown up with. Climate change, social injustice, economic uncertainty. They're looking for meaning and impact.
Yeah.
In a world that often feels pretty chaotic. But how does that actually translate to the workplace? Especially when you have multiple generations working side by side, each with their own set of expectations.
Well, it creates, both challenges and opportunities. Imagine like a boomer boss who came up through the ranks with a very traditional mindset, FaceTime loyalty to the company, putting in long hours. And now they're managing a team of millennials who are all about flexibility, work-life balance, a company culture that aligns with their values.
Talk about a potential clash of cultures. But it's not just about different work styles, is it? It's about communication leadership, even just how we interact with each other in a professional setting.
Exactly. Millennials and Gen Z might be much more comfortable with informal communication, using emojis and slang in emails. And a boomer boss might think that's totally unprofessional. And then when it comes to feedback, younger generations might want more frequent personalized guidance, while older generations might be used to a more hierarchical top-down approach.
So how do we bridge this generational gap in the workplace then? Because let's be real, these differences aren't going away anytime soon. We need to figure out how to work together effectively.
Absolutely. And I think it starts with acknowledging that there are differences, that each generation brings, its own strengths and weaknesses to the table. Instead of seeing those differences as obstacles, we need to see them as opportunities for growth and learning.
Okay, so concretely, what does that actually look like? How do we create a workplace where different generations can thrive?
Well, the article suggests a few interesting approaches. One is promoting cross-generational mentorship. Pair a seasoned boomer executive with a Gen Z employee and let them learn from each other. The boomer can share, their institutional knowledge and experience, while the Gen Z employee can bring fresh perspectives and insights into new technologies and trends.
I love that. It's a win-win situation.
Yeah.
But it's not just about formal mentorship programs, right? It's about fostering a culture of open communication and respect, where people feel comfortable sharing their ideas and perspectives,
Yeah.
regardless of their age.
Exactly. It's about creating a space where everyone feels heard and valued, where there's room for different work styles and communication preferences. And it's about being willing to learn from each other, to challenge our assumptions about, how things should be done.
This makes me think about all the amazing initiatives happening outside the workplace. So the article touched on intergenerational learning, and you mentioned that you volunteer at a community center. Could there be a way to blend age groups more in the activities there?
That's a great idea. We tend to segregate activities by age, but what if we created more opportunities for intergenerational interaction? Imagine a community garden where seniors could share their gardening expertise with young families, or a tech mentorship program where teens could teach seniors how to use their smartphones.
Those are great examples. And it's not even just about specific programs or anything. It's about creating spaces where different generations can just hang out, you know, interact and learn from each other organically. It could be as simple as a community potluck or a movie night. The key is to break down those age-related silos and create opportunities for genuine connection.
Yeah, I think that's what it all boils down to, connection. When we take the time to connect with people from different generations, to listen to their stories, to understand their perspectives, we start to see each other as individuals, not just stereotypes. And that's where the real magic happens. That's where we start to bridge the divide and build a more inclusive understanding and ultimately a stronger society.
That is beautifully said. It really feels like this whole conversation has been about moving beyond labels and stereotypes and embracing the richness that comes with, generational diversity. We've explored the challenges, the clashes, the different perspectives, but ultimately it's about recognizing that we're all part of this shared human experience.
We are. And when we harness the strengths of each generation, when we find that common ground, when we choose collaboration over conflict, we unlock something really powerful.
We unlock the potential for a future that's built on understanding empathy and a shared commitment to making the world a better place.
And that's a future worth striving for.
Absolutely. And that's a wrap on our deep dive into generational perspectives in politics. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey. We hope you've gained some valuable insights and are inspired to foster more intergenerational understanding in your own lives. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.